Leg day is one of those workouts you either love or hate. It's hard, you get super sore, and it's one of those muscle groups that can either make or break your physique. So instead of being like your average gym bro or one of those guys that looks like Johnny Bravo, here's my complete beginner's guide to the perfect leg day. Now there's 4 main parts to training your legs: your quads, your glutes, your hammies, and even your calves. Your quads are responsible for the extension of the leg or extension of the knee joint. Your glutes, which are responsible for hip extension, but are also very prevalent in a lot of athletic movements. Your hammies, which are on the back of the leg, which are pretty much responsible for bringing your heel to your bum. And then your calves, which are kind of like the forearms of the leg, which are responsible for, a little bit of movement in the ankle. Okay, so now that we understand the main muscle groups of the leg, let's get into how to start your workout specifically. Now we've all heard that you should freaking warm up beforehand, just to make sure that you can maximize your performance as well as the mind-muscle connection so you can get the most out of the workout. But the warm-up is as much of a mental preparation as it is physical. Now, complete transparency, I personally very rarely feel like working out, and this could last all the way up until I'm midst in the warm-up in my workout. Once I get underway in the warm-up, I release my inner demons, and that really changes the ball game. It's night and day difference. Now there's 3 parts to that warm-up. Now it's not gonna take long, so bear with me. You got the cardio. I typically recommend the bike, jump rope. I recommend walking on a treadmill at an incline, but at the end of the day, it should last about 5 to 10 minutes. And the main purpose of this is to increase your core body temperature, increase that blood flow, and break a nice little sweat. Which brings us to the second part of the warm-up. This is stretching. Now there's static stretching and there's dynamic stretching, and there's a lot of controversy of which one should be best for certain people, but most of the literature kind of explains or kind of leans more towards dynamic being more beneficial for warming up your body in terms of getting you ready for a good lift. When it comes to static stretching being beneficial or detrimental to strength training specifically, because it creates micro tears, making it inefficient to press more efficiently or push as much weight or be as strong as you could be, therefore being detrimental to your workout. However, some people also say that it is not going to make that big of a difference and you shouldn't even worry about it. But for me in particular, I recommend dynamic stretching just so I can avoid that, even if it's just a little bit, and I can really maximize building up my core body temperature and moving that joint through its full range of motion. Finally, this brings me to part 3, which is sports specific, or your skill specific is going to be practicing the movement that you're gonna do first, or practicing variations of the movement that you're gonna do first. Or if you're doing this for a sport, it's practicing the things that are conducive to your sport. So in this case, because we're training for hypertrophy, we would essentially do 2 to 4 sets of the squat at about 10 to 15 reps at a very light load so we can start training that range of motion. We're doing it like this because your mind-muscle connection is at its best. It's at its peak, especially when it comes to hypertrophy, once you've taken yourself through the exercise at hand, in this case squats. But Sky, this is a beginner guide. What exactly is the mind-muscle connection? The mind-muscle connection is your ability to feel, engage, contract the muscle that you're trying to work in a specific movement. So the better that your mind-muscle connection is, the better the workout is going to be. This is gonna bring us to our workout. But before I do, consider subscribing if you're getting some value and if you wanna stay tuned for the rest of the Complete Beginner's Guide series. Now back to the workout, this brings us to another 3 parts. We got your skills right in the beginning. We got your ICU, I'm gonna tell you what that is in a second. And then we got your isolation work. I typically recommend 3 parts. You got the skills section. This is part number 1. This is your squats, this is your lunges, your split squats. The second part is your ICU, which these are things like your leg press, your hack squat, your Smith machines. And finally, you got your isolation work, your leg extensions, leg curls, calf raises, etc. And since we already warmed up, it's time to work. We're starting with the number 1 skill right now, the squats. Now this is for beginners right now, so number 1 is do not sacrifice your form for weight on the bar. It's not about pushing as much weight as possible, it's about building your foundation with good form and practice. For example, in the squat specifically, now that you've already done your 2 to 4 sets of 10 to 15 reps of your warm-up sets, what you want to be focusing on now is finding a comfortable weight for you to push yourself for another 3 to 4 sets of about 8 to 12 reps. I'm gonna break down the squat in all its detail and all its fun, but that's gonna happen in a future video, and I'm gonna link that video in the description box below. But still, with that being said, here's a few pointers. Number 1 is start with your feet around or just outside shoulder width apart, starting with your feet slightly pointed out. Number 2 is as you start your descent, you're gonna slightly push your knees out, and please note that it's okay for your knees to travel over your toes a bit. Number 3 is an ATG squat. An ass to grass squat is not not necessary for hypertrophy. And as a beginner, my typical recommendation is to get your hip crease right in line with the top of your knee. And tip number 4 is most people, especially when it comes to beginners, are gonna be held back by their ankle mobility. So elevating your heels just a little bit is gonna help you reach the depth that I just listed in tip number 3. You can use a couple plates, a board. You do not, I repeat, you do not have to buy some expensive squatting shoes. Let's maximize what we got. Moving on to part 2 of your workout, this is your ICM, which stands for intense compound movements. These intense compound movements, especially for a beginner, are gonna be the main driver of hypertrophy right now. The squat is something that you shouldn't go excessively heavy on or pushing to muscular failure. You need to practice, so it is the intense compound movements, your leg press, your machine work, essentially your Smith machines. All these movements are gonna place you in a more fixed position, therefore you're less likely to compromise your form and you can really push the intensity here. Remember guys, it's training to failure that's gonna stimulate the most muscle growth, and it's that training to failure done in a safe manner consistently is what's gonna be responsible for building some nice legs. Now there is so many different variations of the leg press, there's so many different variations of the hack squat, and family, 100% you're gonna see people recommending you to push through your heels to target more glutes and hammies and push through the front of your foot to target more quads. But at the end of the day, as a beginner, a simple adjustment of slightly moving your feet placement or your foot placement upward is gonna target your glutes and hamstrings more, emphasize them more, and slightly moving them downward, but still pushing through the entirety of your foot is gonna emphasize the quad. Guys, as a beginner, don't worry about the fancy foot placement, just slightly move them up, slightly move them down, but it's gonna depend on what you feel most comfortable with. For these movements specifically, again, you wanna shoot for about another 2 to 4 sets of about 8 to 12 reps here. I wanna talk about the calves real quick. Guys, I know how it is. Typically, the further back you place your calves, the less likely somebody is to do them. The same goes for abs. I personally like to stick my calves in a superset with my skills or my intense compound movements because, like you, like most of you, I'm less likely to do my calves if I place them at the end. But also, I can attack them with the same intensity or with greater intensity than I would be if I place them at the end of the workout. Leg day is taxing, so moving my calves upward towards the beginning of the workout or the middle of the workout, I can hit them with higher quality. For isolations, this is all about hitting leg curls and leg extensions. For leg curls, hitting your hamstrings, this is gonna be your prone leg curl or lying leg curl, but this can also be your seated leg curl. As for leg extensions, you typically only got one option, that's the leg extension. Now this is where I wanna bring up a little something called tempo. Tempo is the speed at which you perform a particular repetition. And the tempo I recommend here is a 1-1-0-1. Typically there's 4 numbers to describe tempo, and each number represents each phase of the movement in seconds. Now I don't want to get too much into tempo. However, a slow 1 to 2 second negative of the movement followed by a nice good contraction, a good squeeze, followed by another 1 to 2 second negative, that's ideally the tempo that I want you to shoot for. And I think this goes without saying, but I would also apply this to your calf raises as well. Okay guys, by now you should feel good. You should feel freaking good. And if you push it a little too hard, you're probably gonna feel a little taxed. However, what I do recommend if you feel like you've gone a little bit too hard is hop on the bike for another 5 minutes as a little bit of a cool down. That should help with the soreness. Also, make sure you're getting enough protein to help with that recovery. And typically what I recommend for the isolation movements is I'll kick the rep range up a little bit. It'll be 10 to 15 reps at about 2 to 3 sets. Now, what's the frequency at which you should train legs? Typically, I would recommend someone who's just a beginner starting off to hit them once per week. But once you start feeling that you can push a little further, and if time permits, let's go ahead and kick that frequency up to 2 times per week. 1 to 2 times per week done in a progressive manner, making sure you're progressing every single workout should be more than enough to carry you through all the way to an intermediate lifter. Now that's it for the complete beginner's guide to an epic leg day. Make sure you caress that subscribe button because I do want to make sure that you stay in the loop for the rest of the complete beginner's guide series. Guys, check the link in the description for any of the supplements that I take, especially as a vegetarian, quote unquote bodybuilder, calisthenics dude. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that you guys know what I am taking in full transparency